We are back with another Stardom Situm, also a rankings edition with these running backs. Now that we are headed into week 3. Week 2 is finally behind us, and it was a very good week for these running backs, and it looks like it's going to even be a better week this week. So these are going to be our running back 1 rankings 1 through 12 for these week 3 matchups. And as you can see, there are some pretty obvious options at the top with CMC, Austin Eckler, and Tony Pollard. They have some pretty favorable matchups. And Nathan, I'm curious. Out of this 1 through 12 running back 1 options, which one are you most interested in?
I wouldn't say I'm the most interested in it, but it's probably the safest bet, and that's Christian McCaffrey. And, of course, if you have Christian McCaffrey, you're going to start him. I mean, you'd be stupid not to. But after seeing the Giants' defense the past 2 weeks, I mean, they gave up 30-plus points to the Cardinals with Josh Dobbs at quarterback. James Conner had a pretty good week against them. So imagine what Kyle Shanahan's going to be able to dial up with Christian McCaffrey. And we already know that offense runs through Christian McCaffrey. So I really look forward to McCaffrey, just picking apart that defense and probably having one hellacious week of fantasy football and just tearing it up, looking good. And he might be able to win your week, just him alone. So I know that's a typical person you'd start, but I just like the matchup there just because of how bad the Giants defense has looked so far this year.
Yeah, at first I was like, man, I didn't know if it was the Giants were just this bad or the Cowboys were this good in week 1, but then how they played in week 2, they were having to compete against the Arizona Cardinals, who are competing for dead last in the NFL this year. So I don't know. So yeah, Christian McCaffrey, I feel like is going to have a heyday versus them this week. So I very well easily see them getting ahead and staying ahead, which only means that Christian McCaffrey is going to have one great week ahead of him. But Dalton, I am curious, also out of this list, who is your stardom for week 3?
Who I'm going with, based on this list, someone that I really like after week 2 is Zach Moss, who's going up against the Ravens in Baltimore. So he just returned from injury week 2 after breaking his forearm during training camp. So there was a little bit of concern coming into this. I kind of stayed away from him, but now I really like him. In his week 2 matchup against the Texans, Moss, he rushed for 18 times for 88 yards, which is a 5-yard average, which is really good. And he also had a touchdown and also brought in all 4 of his targets. So I really like that he's also becoming kind of a receiving back on top of that. So I'm kind of getting these Jonathan Taylor type vibes. It seems like the Colts haven't really shied away from that type of production and giving him that production that Jonathan Taylor had, which I really like. And just in case no one realized, he was the only running back to record a carry in week 2 for the Colts. There was no other running back behind him. He was the only one that received a carry. So to me, that's also really good looking at that. Now, there are 2 more games that he has before Jonathan Taylor returns from the PUP list. So Moss will be the featured every down back for the Colts until he returns. But in the meantime, I believe Moss will be using his limited opportunity to give the Colts organization a lot to think about. So I really like it. Again, the Ravens are going to be a more stout defense compared to the Texans. But they just gave up 138 rushing yards in the first 2 weeks of the season, which is a 70-yard average. So I feel like that's the floor for Moss. But I do feel like the Ravens will be something that can still be compromised. And so I'm expecting him to still get about 20-plus touches this game, over 100-yard scrimmage. So I definitely wouldn't be shying away from this week from an injury. I think it's all behind him now, and I think he's got a little chip on his shoulder and wants to prove to the organization that, I can be the RB1 here. Just let's let JT go.
Well, yeah, I think they do let JT go.
Honestly, I really do feel like his time there is kind of over. He isn't accepting anything else, which does open up those doors for Zach Moss. And I mean, even more so, like we're saying, if Anthony Richardson is potentially out this week, we know that he had that injury in that week 2 matchup. So maybe they do have to rely a little bit more on that run game, which makes Zach Moss that much more of an option in fantasy. So looking really good for him in this week 3 matchup. But let's go ahead and show these running back 2 rankings are 13 through 24. Now, this is where I have my stardom option for this week. And if we look here at number 20, it's James Cook versus the Washington Commanders. Now, if you're questioning on why I picked a running back to face this awesome defensive line of the Washington Commanders, it's just, I guess, let me explain. Because if we look at how the Commanders have done the first 2 weeks, they have been very good against the run. Really defending the running backs, because they've only allowed 58 total rush yards alongside 68 total receiving yards to running backs. Also, no touchdowns, and then also the 4th least fantasy points to running backs. Their attempts is about middle of the pack, so that's what you would kind of expect in these types of games. So nothing is really too good, but why I love James Cook in this matchup, he's just in a high-scoring offense with the Bills. So far, through 2 weeks, they're averaging 27 points per game, but then more so, they're top 10 in pace of play. And because of that, you've seen through these first 2 weeks that James Cook is a valuable part of this Buffalo Bills offense. He averages 20 touches a game, whether that be through the air or on the ground, averaging 5.5 yards per carry and 5 targets per game. So I know that this Washington Commanders defense is going to be very tough, and they have allowed very few points, but I don't think that the Bills are just going to shy away from James Cook and saying, hey, you're not it. We're going to move on, and we're going to rely more so on Stephon Diggs and Gabe Davis. I think that's a little bit criminal and kind of, I don't see the logic there. So I think James Cook is going to be used a lot. Him here at 20, I feel like is a pretty good spot for him. But I think, again, that is his floor. I think we could see him kind of move up those numbers. So now, again, these are our full rankings 1 through 24 for these running backs in their week 3 matchups. Now, there are some people that did not make the list this week. And Nathan, curious, who is your sit-em for the week 3 matchups? What is someone you do not like?
Dalvin Cook. I mean, come on, guys.
That was quick.
Yeah, I mean, it's hands down. Once he signed with the Jets, everybody in their mock drafts are like getting Dalvin Cook. People in the regular drafts are getting Dalvin Cook because they didn't know what Breece Hall was going to be like. Well, going into week 1 and week 2, we could see that Breece Hall got most of the workload. And Dalvin Cook against the Cowboys, terrible. I mean, Breece Hall.
Anyone against those Cowboys are terrible, though.
Say that one more time. Let's say that one more time.
I'm going to let it marinate for you.
I just got one thing to say.
Anyone against those Cowboys.
How about them Cowboys? How about them Cowboys? No, I just don't think from what I've seen from the Jets, it seems like if they're going to have a heavy run load or a heavy game where they're running the ball a lot, I feel like most of that workload is going to be put on Breece Hall. And I've heard some talks about the Jets didn't even want to sign Dalvin Cook. It was Aaron Rodgers who wanted to bring him in because they're so high on Breece Hall. So if you have Dalvin Cook, to keep him under bench, I don't know. I mean, he's going to probably have a week or a couple of weeks where he goes off. But just from what I've seen here lately, it just seems like Breece Hall is the kind of guy that they like to lean on to carry the workload there in New York. So plus they're playing the Patriots, and one of the things that Bill Belichick has said in the past is that when we don't mind giving up yards, we're just not going to let you get behind us, but when you get to the red zone, we're playing some football. And they showed that against the Eagles. The Eagles really struggled to get the ball in the end zone against the Patriots defense because that defense is so dominant in the red zone. And I feel like if you had Dalvin Cook and if you're starting him, you're going touchdown dependent, and that New England defense has been pretty good in the red zone lately.
Yeah, and that New England defense is to kind of shy away from and stay away from. So I really like the take there to stay away from him here, because I mean, they've just been so dominant on defense, and that's exactly who they are year in and year out. But let's go ahead and move on to the next player. Dalton, who is your sit-em for these week 3 matchups?
Yeah, so looking, at someone who's not on our list, I'm actually going to go. I chose somebody based on the defense that we were just talking about, and that's his matchup with the Dallas Cowboys. So in week 3, I chose James Conner with the Cardinals. So he's played decently well in the first 2 weeks of the regular season. In the first 2 weeks, he accounted for 170 scrimmage yards, give or take, which is not bad on paper, right? But he also faced 2 pretty mediocre teams in the Washington Commanders and the New York Giants, probably 2 of the worst teams in the NFL right now. So don't be entirely fooled by his recent success. I believe that everything is going to come back to reality for the Cardinals here soon in the next week. So when they face a truly battle-tested Dallas Cowboys defense. So they are also responsible for 10 sacks, 2 fumbles, and 5 interceptions through the first 2 weeks of the season so far. And so I'm kind of expecting nothing to kind of be the same script for the Cowboys defense here come this week. So you'll be setting yourself up for failure this week if you choose to start James Conner in your week 3 versus a red-hot Dallas Cowboys defense. So, and my advice, I would say definitely stay away.
I agree. I was going to say I agree. I might be a little biased here, but Micah Parsons is him. I mean, you don't have to be a Cowboys fan to admit that that's probably one of the best defensive players in the league right now. And like Dalton mentioned, it's just going to be hard to do anything, or at least running the ball on that front 7 with the linebackers and the D-line and Micah Parsons. It's going to be hard.
And I think with this defense, this Dallas Cowboys defense, within the first 5 games, I would be predicting that they are going to be putting up defensive stats that most teams won't reach throughout the 17 games that they play. I mean, I feel like that's what they're on par for. So with that being said, I wouldn't play any wide receiver or any running back that really goes against this team. So they're pretty crazy right now, historic.
Yeah, and I was excited to watch Aaron Rodgers trying to come in week 2 and see this matchup. Obviously, we didn't get that. We got Zach Wilson, so and Daniel Jones in this New York offense is, I don't know. I mean, it's tough to see if Dallas really had any true potential in like their opponents, but we'll see moving into this week in Arizona. I'm not really high on that either. So I do agree, although James Conner is one of the bright spots of that team, I think that it's best to probably stay away and you sit him this week. But let's go ahead and move on to my guy for my sit in this week 3 matchup, and that is Tyler Algier versus the Detroit Lions. The Detroit Lions have been fair to running backs through the first 2 weeks, allowing 53.5 rush yards per game alongside 36.5 receiving yards per game. Alongside 2 touchdowns. They didn't allow any touchdowns to running backs through the first week, but last week to the Seattle Seahawks, they gave up 2 to Kenneth Walker. But with that, running backs struggle against the Detroit Lions. They've only allowed 18 fantasy points per game to running backs, which is, it's middle, but more towards the lower side of that middle group. And it's mostly because of the attempts that they have, and it's 17.5 per game, which again is pretty low. Now, I know that this Falcons offense is built to run, but I think that we start to see it in more so of a trend that we saw in week 2 when Atlanta faced Green Bay. That was Bijan's offense. It was not Tyler Allgeier's. And I know it's a pretty split set. Bijan got 19 carries. Tyler Allgeier got 16. So, I mean, it is quite equal, but Tyler is nowhere near as efficient as Bijan. You can tell when Bijan's on that field, that offense runs completely different. So I don't see a lot changing the more that this season progresses. And I think if anything, what changes is Tyler Allgeier's usage and reps and stuff start to go down. And I think that the way that they handled the Green Bay Packers defense, who is fairly decent against the run, I mean, Bijan threw up over 100 and it wasn't even the third quarter yet. So even if Detroit gives up 18 fantasy points to the running back position. I see it being a little bit more maybe this week just because of the usage that Atlanta uses their running backs. I think most of that is going to be taken by Bijan Robinson. And again, like I said, Detroit does an excellent job of shutting down running backs. Isaiah Pacheco in week 1 did not do good. Kenneth Walker in week 2, you can argue that he had a good week, but he was highly touchdown dependent. He had a 2.5 yards per carry average, but then had 2 touchdowns. So the touchdowns for sure were a saving grace. But if you look at overall as a rusher, how he was, it was not that great. And I do see that Tyler Algier is going to have those same problems. And if you're picking an Atlanta running back, pick Bijan. And I think that that's pretty consensus that if you're picking an Atlanta running back, pick Bijan over any of them.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point, too. You know, with Tyler Algier, you know, I still, like you said, you can make a case for him now because it's kind of crazy to have a handcuff running back like him get those type of opportunities, which is ridiculous. I still don't see Bijan getting like all of those carries and getting like 30-plus touches at the line of scrimmage. But Tyler Algier, I think he's still a decent flex for you if you still have him. I think even if he loses, I don't think he'll lose more than 10. Or less than 10 touches. So I think he can still be a good flex option for you. But like DJ was saying, I would definitely still expect that be some type of regression, especially with Bijan, especially when games get close. They're definitely going to go with the hotter hand in Bijan, who's going to carry that team. And Algier is going to kind of take the back seat in those instances. And sometimes you don't know which week that might be. So I wouldn't run it unless you need someone to fill that flex spot.
Yeah, or if you have a team somewhat similar to Nathan's where you went full send on Jamar Chase and you're kind of looking for a change here, maybe Tyler Algier is someone that may score more points week to week than a Jamar Chase.
I'm sure there's a lot of y'all out there that's taking a gut punch like I am right now. I got Jamar Chase in 3 out of my 4 leagues, and he's been the reason I've lost. So it sucks, boys. It sucks.
Oh, man.
It sucks for you. I sure do love watching it. So hopefully y'all love watching this show. Thank y'all so much for tuning in to the running back stardom, situms, and rankums for these week 3 matchups. And we will see y'all next time. Make sure y'all check out the wide receivers.